When a group of hikers stumbled upon a mysterious tomb during one of their mountain climbs, they couldn't believe their luck. The entrance to the tomb was hidden behind a large encircled building stone, and the hikers had to make an effort to roll the stone away to enter. But when they stepped inside, their excitement turned into fear. The tomb was dark and damp, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. In the flickering light of their torches, the hikers, Sarah, her husband Alex, and their friend Jake, could clearly see that this place was built by humans. The passage seemed to go on forever, and they had to use their headlamps to navigate through the darkness. Alex and Jake's eyes gleamed with curiosity, fixated on the locked door that lay ahead. Sarah, on the other hand, was hesitant and afraid, pleading to turn back. She stood in between, torn between her own fears and the group's determination to unveil the mystery behind the door. With a sense of adventure and curiosity, Sarah finally gave in and agreed to continue exploring. Armed with a heavy stone, Jake tried his luck at unlocking the mysterious door. He used all his strength and hit the lock with the stone as hard as he could. He had hoped it would break after the first hit, but it didn't. He didn't give up and continued kicking the lock a few more times. Jake took a few deep breaths as he gathered the courage for his next task. He stood before the door and landed a strong kick. The door creaked open slowly, making a loud, horrible screeching sound. It must not have been opened in many, many years. The trio held their breath and realized that they could not go back now. As they stepped into the ancient passage, the air grew damp and musty. The walls were lined with mysterious symbols and strange hieroglyphics. Alex and Jake's determination didn't waver, despite Sarah's protests to turn back. Soon enough, Sarah's scream pierced through the eerie silence of the ancient passage, and the trio stumbled upon something that took their breath away. They all turned pale when they realized what they were looking at. They were now standing in an open space surrounded by skeletons. Everywhere they looked, they saw heaps of bones. As they looked around the space, they noticed something about the skeletons. It seemed as if they were all arranged in a big circle, with one skeleton in the middle of it. As they approached the skeleton in the middle, they noticed something strange about it. They saw something shiny in its hands. It was holding a mysterious box. Upon taking a closer look, they saw that the box was completely covered with some kind of inscription. Alex and Jake were discussing what would be the easiest way to take the box out of the skeleton's grasp when they heard a faint rustling noise coming from the darkness. They all froze in place. Jake and Alex quickly shone their lights around the chamber and were relieved to see that it had just been a few leaves and debris blown around by the wind. Sarah pleaded with them to leave the box behind and just go home. But Alex and Jake were determined to uncover the secrets inside it. In the end, Sarah agreed to stay, but she wasn't going to help them. She didn't want to touch any skeleton or even stand too close to it. Sarah waited outside the skeleton circle while Alex and Jake cautiously approached the skeleton in the middle again. Both of them were scared, but their curiosity was much bigger than their fear. Both guys disliked being inside the circle, so they decided to make it quick. Jake's hands trembled as he reached for the box, feeling a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Alex carefully pulled apart the skeleton's fingers, and with one final tug, Jake wrenched the box free from the skeleton's grasp. The sound of cracking bone echoed through the ancient chamber. As the three of them looked at the inscriptions on the box, they came to the conclusion that it must be a foreign, possibly even ancient language. They took turns holding the box, inspecting it closely, and looking for a way to open it. It seemed impossible. Sarah got caught up in it all and forgot about her fear for a second. She was determined to find a way to open it. Upon taking a closer look, Sarah discovered that the box was indeed a puzzle, and that the inscriptions on the box were patterns and symbols waiting to be solved. Her eyes sparkled with determination and curiosity as she traced the signs with her fingers, imagining what she would find inside. She took a deep breath and accepted the challenge. Each twist and turn of the symbols held a clue, a piece of the puzzle waiting to be deciphered. She could feel that she had almost solved it, and then, as she twisted the last piece into place, she held her breath. Suddenly, she heard a soft click from inside the box. She did it. She carefully lifted the lid, her eyes widening in disbelief as she looked inside. "Come on, Sarah. What's inside it? Show us," Alex and Jake said. But Sarah stayed silent. She was considering her options. She could just close the box and tell them it was empty, or she could show them right now. But if she showed them, they would be stuck here for a little while longer. She was sure of it. She decided to just show them. They had gotten this far already, and she couldn't deny that she was curious about where the contents of the box would lead them to. Alex and Jake gasped as she showed it to them. It was a key, golden, shiny, and beautifully made, with lots of intricate details. They decided to start looking in the chamber with the skeleton circle first. They didn't know what they were looking for exactly, but they kept their eyes open for anything that could be opened with a key, a door, some kind of safe, another box. After another hour, they still hadn't found anything yet. They were almost beginning to lose hope and ready to go home when Alex yelled, "Guys, over here! I found something!" Alex had found a secret opening to another room. He had been checking out a wall, and as he accidentally pushed a stone, he heard the stone door sliding open. As it opened, a bright light shone through the opening. As they walked through the door, they couldn't hide their amazement. They had entered a beautiful room filled with shiny statues and treasures. Their eyes danced around the room as they took it all in. Then they noticed something that was maybe even more special. They spotted many artifacts and manuscripts, strange maps, and sculptures. What a special discovery! But they still had one thing left to do. They still needed to figure out what the key from the mysterious box could be used for. They looked around the room for a while and spotted a few large boxes they could try it on when they were suddenly interrupted. They heard something in the distance. It sounded like voices whispering. They all looked at each other in shock, terrified. Moments later, something else happened. The loud clanging sound started echoing through the room. Just as suddenly as the noise had started, it now stopped. The trio stood there in complete silence, scared to move. They had to do something. But what? They were all terrified, and they wanted to leave this place alive. Suddenly, Alex disappeared. He ran through the opening, out of their sight, and Sarah and Jake followed him as quickly as they could. "Alex, wait up!" they yelled, but he kept running. Then they heard him scream. Jake and Sarah looked at each other in shock and ran after Alex as quickly as possible. Once they arrived, out of breath, they saw what had happened. They froze in place, completely shocked. How was this possible? Who had done this? This was an absolute nightmare. To their shock, the metal door that Jake had kicked open before was now closed again, and it was locked. They refused to believe it, and they tried everything they could to open the door again. But nothing worked. They couldn't even kick it open this time. They had to accept that they were stuck here. As they stood in front of the locked door, their hearts sank with fear. Sarah's tears turned to sobs as the reality of their situation set in. Alex and Jake exchanged a worried glance. Then Sarah realized that she still had the key. Sure, it was a long shot, but it was the only thing left for them to try. What if the key couldn't open this door? They would be stuck here forever, and that thought scared them more than anything else had before. With tears in her eyes, she took a deep breath and prayed that the key would fit in the lock. And sure enough, it did. They all gasped in excitement and hope at the thought of going home soon. Sarah was just about to turn the key and unlock the door when they heard the same voices coming from the darkness again. "Sarah, now!" Alex shouted urgently, urging his wife on as they desperately tried to escape the mysterious tomb. Sarah finally unlocked the door, and they bolted toward the tomb entrance, running as fast as they could. Breathless and shaken, they emerged from the tomb, their minds racing with questions. Who had locked the door? What were those voices they heard? They were still frightened, but also extremely relieved to see the daylight and breathe the fresh air. While their hearts were still racing from the terrifying experience they had inside the tomb, they thought about what they were going to do next. Should they just go home and forget about this? Or should they call the police? Would the police even believe them if they heard their story? After giving it some thought, they knew what they had to do. The three of them agreed that they should definitely tell the police what had happened, but instead of calling them, they decided to go right to the station. When they arrived at the police station, nobody believed them, which wasn't a big surprise. Sarah was determined. She did not go through all that just to be sent home. She was stubborn and finally was able to convince two of the officers to go back to the tomb with them. Sarah could see that the officers were annoyed, but she knew that they would believe them as soon as they got to the entrance of the tomb. When the five of them arrived at the entrance, the officers gasped in disbelief. They immediately called for backup, and moments later, the place was swarming with police cars, officers, and even archaeologists. They started an investigation, and Alex, Sarah, and Jake were finally able to go home. A couple of days later, the police knocked on Alex and Sarah's door. An officer came by to share some important news with them. As it turned out, they had discovered something very special. The tomb belonged to a lost ancient civilization. This was incredible news, and the three friends were shocked. However, they still had one question. They still hadn't figured out what was up with those voices and other sounds they had heard inside the tomb. The officer laughed and told them that the investigators had found an explanation for that as well. They had actually been other people inside the tomb with them, and they had been arrested. Sarah and Alex laughed when they found out why. They were grave robbers. A group of thieves had heard rumors about a hidden treasure somewhere in the area and had found the entrance to the tomb. However, they never managed to find the hidden room, but Alex did. That is also why the robbers had locked the door on them, so they wouldn't escape with the treasure. The grave robbers were arrested, and Alex, Sarah, and Jake became heroes on the news. Thanks to them, the investigators were able to uncover more about this mysterious and long-forgotten civilization. Years later, when the investigation was officially closed, the tomb even became a museum where people could see the beautiful artifacts of the past with their own eyes. Alex, Sarah, and Jake continued going on hikes, even though their experience in the tomb had been terrifying at the time. It had strengthened their bond and changed their lives for the better. Their friendship had become even stronger, and when Alex and Sarah had their first child, they even asked Jake to be their daughter's godfather.